The Ghouls and Ghosts are back, thanks to the just-released Switch game Ghosts N Goblins Resurrection. This is the long-awaited return of Sir Arthur, who is probably best known for his classic 8 and 16-bit adventures like Ghosts N Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, and of course, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. But what if I were to tell you that our boxer short-wearing hero starred in another, long-forgotten Ghosts N Goblins game? No, I'm not talking about that so-so PSP title where Arthur has to collect a bunch of rings, but rather Makaimura for WonderSwan, a black and white sequel that was exclusive for a system that never made its way out of Japan. To help celebrate the release of Ghosts N Goblins Resurrection, we're going to talk about the series' best kept secret. Turn back now if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to spoil the story and ending for Makaimura for WonderSwan. This is Game Over, the early years. Okay, so I want you to forget everything that you know about the previous trilogy, because Sir Arthur is going back to his old tricks. Wooing women at the graveyard. Look, he's been pulling this move since the mid-80s, so clearly it works enough of the time. But you would think that if it ends with a demonic kidnapping once or twice, then you might start to reconsider going to the graveyard and, I don't know, instead get a reservation at a restaurant, or go to a museum, or just do the whole Netflix and chill thing. I don't know about you, but if monsters nabbed my beautiful girlfriend on a date next to a bunch of tombstones, then you know what? I'm gonna have to take at least partial responsibility for being an awful boyfriend. Anyway, that's exactly how Makaimura for WonderSwan starts. Sir Arthur is getting fresh with Princess Prin Prin when all of a sudden a couple of bare-assed gargoyles show up to ruin the fun. They kidnap Prin Prin, and once again, it's up to Arthur to fight through the ghouls and ghosts haunting the outskirts of town. In other words, it's a Ghosts N Goblins game. They aren't exactly reinventing the story here. The problem with hanging out at a graveyard when all the supernatural shit goes down is that you're stuck at ground zero of a zombie apocalypse. Sir Arthur starts his adventure surrounded by flesh eaters, forcing him to run from left to right in hopes of finding safety at the nearby village. Unfortunately, the pesky ghouls have already destroyed the town, so all Arthur can do is fight zombie Frankenstein and just keep running. This involves sprinting through a rainstorm and taking refuge at the scary castle at the top of the hill. This stage looks a whole lot like the haunted house from the first game, which is just one of the many fun nods that you're going to find from the previous installments. Now, if you thought there was something a little weird about that creepy castle, then you would be right, because the moment Sir Arthur escapes, the castle comes to life and starts chasing him down the hill. The only escape is to jump down a pit and choose whether to go left or right. Either way, our hero's going to need to explore the underground caves, which means that he's going to have to swim for the very first time in the franchise's history. This leads to the long and infuriating climb up the cliff, where Arthur will need to put up with floating platforms and flying enemies. Guys, it's really just the worst thing. It really is. Anyway, after climbing to the top, the brave knight finally gets a look at the Demon Emperor Azazel's imposing palace. Man, just look at that thing. Inside the palace, the game tosses everything at Sir Arthur. If it was an enemy or an obstacle from the previous 3 games, then it probably shows up here. But hey, we've already come this far, and Wikipedia tells me that we won't even need to replay the whole game again to see the real ending. So good news, we're almost done. Now, like a lot of classic games, the road to the end is littered with familiar faces, like the Franken-zombie that we saw from the very first stage. All we need to do is beat the sexy leopard lady with the sword and march right into Azazel's lair and rescue Princess Prin Prin. Just a simple, straightforward plan. Nothing could go wrong, right? Oh, come on! Yeah, Wikipedia lied to us. Just like all the other games in this long-running series, you're gonna have to replay the whole damn game in order to get the right weapon to defeat Azazel. That means once again going through the graveyard, getting chased by that big castle, navigating past the floating platforms, seeing that imposing palace in the distance, and yeah, once again taking on that annoying leopard lady with the sword. The good news, if you can call it that, is that you can now see the other path, which includes turning the WonderSwan to the side in order to play it vertically. It's actually a fun twist on the formula that suggests the developers were thinking of new and interesting ways to use the unique hardware to their advantage. Anyway, now that we finally have the special weapon Prin told us about, it's finally time to take down Azazel. This takes place on the roof for a reason, and it's because the guy is absolutely massive. He's towering over the place, raining fireballs down on you. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the coolest bosses in the entire Ghosts N Goblins series. I mean, I love how big and detailed he is. And trust me, I know a thing or two about Ghosts N Goblins bosses. This is me on GamePro TV 30 years ago telling you how to beat Loki. Yeah. So we end up using Prin's bracelet to kick Azazel's butt, and this is what happens next. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that there was an unofficial remake of this game released back in 2015 under the name Ghosts N Demons. It uses the same sprites and basic level designs to create a faithful homage to a long-forgotten classic. And thanks to the much-needed tweaks to the gameplay, I would argue that it's probably the best version of the game that you can play right now. What's more, you don't even have to play through it twice, and they even went ahead and changed the ending a little bit. You still have to fight Azazel on the palace roof, of course, but he looks even more incredible in color. We once again kick his ass, and this is what happens next. You know, it took us 3 years and 118 episodes before finally talking about Bandai's first foray into the handheld market. But hey, here we are. Believe it or not, I actually imported the WonderSwan color almost 20 years ago, mostly for Makaimura and the Final Fantasy games. And you know what? I'm still impressed by the quality of both the system and the library. We definitely need to spend more time talking about this classic system. When it comes to the endings, I would say that Ghosts N Demons does it better. It's not just the color, but also the added coda at the end that actually pushes the story forward in a meaningful way. My only real complaint about the Ghosts N Demons ending is that they rush through the cast photos. That's something that I really liked about the original game. Every part of that ending takes its time, whereas the remake does everything and more at about half the length. They needed to slow down and take their time, not speeding through the ending, especially when it's gonna leave us on such a great note. I like the idea of Arthur and Prin living happily ever after. Well, until Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, and then Ghosts N Goblins Resurrection, and whatever reboot Capcom decides to come up with 10 years from now. You know what? On second thought, Prin should probably just stay away from a guy who thinks that having a date at a cemetery is a good idea. Just go marry a prince or something and give this poor guy a break. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, the early years. If you still want more Ghosts and Goblins endings, then it's worth mentioning that we already posted a full episode looking at the original trilogy, plus 2 more videos where we went over both of the Maximo games. Definitely go and check those out. Now, here's the question I have for you. Which Makaimura game had the better ending? Do you prefer the original, or did Ghosts and Demons top it? Let me see your pick in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back on Friday with even more Ghosts and Goblins coverage, as we're going to be checking in with Electronic Gaming Monthly to see what the classic critics said about this entire franchise. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,